Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we tackle one big question, run it through a whole stack of research, and pull out the insights you can actually use. Today, we're digging into something that trips up, well, pretty much everyone aiming for something big. Is failure really necessary for success? Or, can you just dodge the mistakes and cruise along?
Well, based on the really integrated research we looked at for this dive, and we're talking clinical psychology, neuroscience, even high-performance engineering, the answer isn't just yes. It's a scientifically provable, almost mechanical yes. Failure. It's not just something to get over. It seems it's the essential input. It's the fuel for the whole engine of progress.
Okay, yeah, let's really get into that because I think people here learn from mistakes. Yeah, and it just sounds like a platitude, right? We need to go deeper. So our mission today is to maybe fundamentally redefine failure, not as like a personal defeat, but as navigational data, essential coordinates.
Exactly. It's a total reframing, moving away from feeling that, that shame when something goes wrong to actively looking for the precise information that mistake gives you.
Okay, so where do we start? What's the anchor for this idea?
The foundational metaphor, the thing that really ties a lot of this together, comes from Dr. Maxwell Maltz, mid-20th century. He was fascinated as a successful plastic surgeon, but also a pioneering psychologist.
A plastic surgeon.
Yeah.
That seems like an unusual path to this kind of insight. How did that connect?
Well, his work was really unique. He noticed that fixing something physical, on someone's face or body didn't always fix their internal self-image or their habits. He realized the mind was running on its own internal logic, some kind of control system aiming for a goal or a certain self-image. And he famously compared the human mind to the most sophisticated self-regulating system they had back then, a guided missile.
Guided missile. Okay. Sets the stage, right. A missile has one job, hit the target.
Right. But Maltz's genius was realizing the path to the target is everything. Success isn't about perfect aim from the start. It's achieved through constant correction, non-stop adjustments.
Which immediately throws up this paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. Success isn't a straight line. Think of it like a GPS route, maybe one with 1,000 detours you just have to take. And here's the kicker, the thing you really have to grasp. You literally cannot course correct if you're standing still. You need movement, even if it's the wrong movement initially, because that's the only way to generate the feedback the system needs to even start working.
Okay, so let's dive into that first section, the mechanics. This idea that failure or deviation isn't a bug, it's actually a feature built right in. Tell us more about this servo-mechanism. Why is it always off course?
So, Maltz explained it like this. The brain, just like that guided missile, is constantly off course. Imagine that missile locked onto a moving target. It can't just fire and forget, no way. It's perpetually zigzagging, just slightly correcting itself based on real-time feedback, environmental forces, wind, target movement, right up until impact. And the crucial insight, the system's accuracy comes from how fast and how well it corrects its own errors.
Right. And I guess if that missile system registered error as some kind of moral failing or felt shame,
it would completely break down. Exactly. If it felt a pang of guilt every time it wobbled 2 degrees off course because of a gust of wind, it would stall or crash. Its success depends entirely on treating that deviation, that little failure to fly perfectly straight as neutral, objective feedback. The system doesn't think defeat, it thinks update. That's the key. It takes all the emotional charge right out of it.
And this isn't just missiles. We see this playing out on a huge scale, like every day in aviation, right? The sources mentioned this error paradox.
Oh yeah, that aviation analogy is powerful. It really brings it home. Think about a modern airliner flying a long haul, say Sydney to Tokyo or New York to London.
That navigation system knows that because of all the variables, crosswinds, air pressure changes, temperature shifts, tiny things, the plane is technically off course something like 90% of the time.
90%? That sounds terrifying. But you're saying that's actually how it works. That's success.
It is. Because the navigation system understands two things. One, the deviation at any given moment is tiny, maybe a fraction of a degree. And two, the rate of correction is incredibly high. The plane isn't just wandering aimlessly. It's making thousands upon thousands of tiny, rapid adjustments. The system doesn't panic. It expects deviation. It knows precision comes from embracing that deviation and constantly correcting it, not trying to somehow avoid the unavoidable, like wind.
You have to be moving to feel the wind.
Exactly. You must be moving to feel the forces acting on you. You have to take the shot to see where it lands, right? That's the non-negotiable part. You cannot course correct from a standstill. You need movement, even flawed movement, to get the feedback. Accuracy is born from error.
Which brings us beautifully to Thomas Edison. He seemed to get this intuitively. Way before Maltz or modern neuroscience, he saw failed experiments differently.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't just trying things. He was systematically collecting, as you said, 10,000 coordinates on the map toward illumination. The sheer scale of his work forced a different perspective. You know that famous quote?
I haven't failed 10,000 times.
I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Right. And he wasn't just being clever or minimizing the effort. That was his actual philosophy. It was data collection.
So each failure wasn't like hitting a wall. It was more like like the sources put it, a whisper from reality saying, not this wheel turn, slightly.
Precisely. His internal servo-mechanism, if you will. Just registered update. Not wrong. Not I'm bad at this. This perspective shift is absolutely critical for us humans. Edison saw failure as data, not pain or defeat. A filament burns out. Okay, that's empirical evidence. It narrows the field. It tells me where not to go next. And that's what kept him going, testing, iterating for decades, while someone else might have given up after, 10 tries, 20.
Okay, so we've got the mechanical analogy, the aviation example, Edison's mindset. Let's shift now from the metaphor to the wetware, the brain itself, because there's a real biological basis for this, right? Error-based learning. This neural GPS idea.
Yes, exactly. This is the biological imperative. This explains why that 90% error rate isn't just okay, it's productive.
Yeah.
Error-based learning is the fundamental way our brains adapt. It's how we use those deviations, those Edison moments, to actively update our internal models of the world. Doesn't matter if it's predicting where a tennis ball will bounce or how a stock market might react. It's how we learn, how we get smarter.
So what's the trigger? What actually happens inside when things don't go as planned?
Well, when an outcome deviates sharply from what you expected, you thought A would happen, but C occurred. Instead, there's a specific brain region that lights up. It's called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. It's kind of the brain's self-monitoring hub, and it fires off this intense signal. Neuroscientists often call it the reward prediction error signal.
Reward prediction error. Okay, let's unpack that. That sounds more specific than just a general oops signal in the brain.
It's much more specific, yeah. The ACC is constantly comparing. What did I expect versus what actually happened? When there's a mismatch, a significant surprise, the system registers an error in the prediction, not necessarily in you, the person. And the signal it sends, it's basically an instruction. It's scientifically understood as neural GPS reroute.
Yeah.
It's sending a simple, urgent message. Hey, you thought the map said A leads to B. It doesn't. The map is wrong. Update the map now. The subconscious doesn't experience it as punishment. It experiences it as vital input. Your brain is literally saying, I need new data to optimize.
Wow. So if I'm trying something and I mess up, my brain isn't judging me. It's actually working perfectly, demanding the data it needs to do better next time.
Exactly. It's functioning precisely as designed.
But this leads to that critical point the sources raised about the stagnation point, doesn't it?
It does. And this is crucial. The research really emphasizes that without that error signal, learning just stops. It stalls completely. If everything always goes exactly as you expect, especially if your expectations are maybe a bit low or mediocre, your internal map never needs updating. The mistake is the required input. Think of it like software testing. You only find the bugs when you run the program under stress, when it encounters something unexpected. If you never run it or only run it in perfectly predictable ways, you never find the bugs and the software stays outdated, potentially vulnerable.
Right. And connecting that back to us, the person trying to learn or achieve something, if you start moving because you're afraid of making a mistake.
You literally shut down your own biological learning mechanism. You guarantee you won't get the coordinates you need to improve.
You're cutting off the signal.
Precisely. The fear of failure becomes a fear of receiving the instruction manual for the next step. It's self-sabotage at a biological level. And if we go even deeper, every time that error signal fires from the ACC, it triggers a physical change. This is neural adaptation. The brain doesn't just conceptually update the map. It starts the process of literally rewiring itself to prevent that same prediction error from happening again.
Actual physical change driven by making a mistake. That's powerful stuff.
It really is. Neural adaptation involves basically pruning away the synaptic connections that led to the wrong prediction and aggressively strengthening or creating new connections. That's synaptogenesis that lead closer to the desired accurate outcome. It's often compared to muscle growth, right? You stress the muscle, create micro tears.
And it rebuilds stronger.
Exactly. The recovery phase builds stronger, more resilient tissue. Failure, in this sense, is biological proof that your system is actively updating. It's getting stronger, smarter. If you're always comfortable, always mistake-free, your brain is probably stagnating.
Okay, so mechanically we need movement. Biologically we need error signals. It all seems perfectly designed for learning through mistakes. Yet, we humans are absolute experts at messing this up, aren't we? We bring in all this emotional baggage.
We absolutely are. And this brings us right back to Maltz and the psychological side of things. He pointed out that humans seem to be the only species that takes perfectly neutral feedback and turns it into self-blame, into shame. The biggest difference, the absolute crux between people who learn effectively from failure and those who get paralyzed by it is how they perceive it, how they label that error signal.
Which connects directly to Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset, right? That feels like the psychological key here.
It's foundational. Dweck's research showed, empirically, that students with a growth mindset, meaning they see mistakes as feedback on their strategy or effort, not as proof they're inherently dumb or bad at something, they learn dramatically faster. They stay motivated longer. They perform better. Why? Because their servo-mechanism interprets the wrong turn correctly as an update signal. But if you interpret failure emotionally, this means I'm incompetent, I'll never get this, you create paralysis. You jam the system. Interpret it scientifically. Okay, that approach didn't yield the expected result. What data did I just gain? And you create progress.
And this jamming, this emotional interference, that's what Maltz was warning about.
Exactly. He called it jamming the servo-mechanism. When the ego gets bruised, that subconscious correction system, it either shuts down or goes into defense mode. Instead of calmly adjusting the trajectory, the person withdraws, I quit. Defends, it wasn't my fault, it was XYZ, or just spins in self-doubt and anxiety. And the most toxic way we jam it, the absolute worst distortion, is framing the error as identity. We stop saying, my presentation failed to connect, and we start saying, I failed, I am a failure. The moment you do that, the guided missile stops correcting its course because the pilot inside is having an existential crisis about whether they should even be flying. Maltz talked about the success mechanism getting blocked by this failure mechanism of self-sabotage.
Okay, so if the core problem is this emotional hijacking, this identity fusion, what's the fix? Maltz offered a way to get the system back online, right? To separate self from strategy.
He did. And it's deceptively simple, but incredibly profound. It lies in a simple linguistic shift. Maltz basically told his patients, stop saying I failed. Start saying it failed.
I failed versus it failed. That sounds subtle.
It's subtle, but the psychological impact is huge. I failed attacks your identity. It makes it personal, emotional, paralyzing. You feel worthless. It failed focuses attention entirely on the strategy, the method, the experiment, the environment. It keeps the focus external, objective, improvable. One keeps you stuck in shame. The other keeps you steering, looking for the next adjustment.
Okay, so let's make that practical. If I'm trying to say stop procrastinating or stick to a new workout routine and I slip up, I relapse.
You absolutely do not say, see, I knew it. I'm just lazy. I can't stick to anything. That is jamming the mechanism with toxic emotion. Instead, you analyze the strategy. Okay, it failed. Why? The scheduling strategy failed because it didn't account for that energy dip I always get at 3 p.m. Or the goal setting failed because trying to do an hour straight away was unrealistic in this distracting environment. You treat the relapse purely as data, essential data. It teaches you exactly what your triggers are or where your method is weak. You use that coordinate to adjust the strategy or the environment, not attack your character. That's where real lasting change comes from, iterative, rational self-correction.
It really highlights how unnatural, how learned this negative emotional reaction is. The sources use the example of a child learning to walk.
Oh, it's the perfect illustration. It shows the servo mechanism in its pure natural state, before society and self-consciousness layer on all the shame. A toddler falls down hundreds, maybe thousands of times learning to walk, but they never, ever stop, look at their scraped knee and think, you know what, maybe walking just isn't for me. I'm clearly not cut out for this walking thing.
No, they just get back up.
They just get back up. They instinctively treat every single wobble, every tumble, as a calibration point. Pure feedback. They're demonstrating the raw pre-emotional error correction system we all have, but which we adults train ourselves out of with fear of judgment, perfectionism, all that stuff. The universe isn't mocking the toddler when they fall. It's just giving them biomechanical coordinates for the next attempt. It's humbling, really. A 1-year-old often has a cleaner, more effective feedback loop than a CEO.
Okay, that completely reframes it. If we accept this model success as just a pattern of intelligent re-rates based on data, we can look at some major achievers differently. Let's get into some case studies. Section 4, iterative correction in business, for example.
Right. Let's look at Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Bezos' entire philosophy seems built on this servo-mechanism idea applied to business. He famously said Amazon's success is basically a function of how many experiments we do per year, per month, per week. He doesn't see failure as loss. He sees it as the unavoidable, relatively low cost of acquiring crucial data.
And they had some massive public failures, didn't they? Things that looked like huge blunders. The Fire Phone comes to mind, Amazon auctions, Z-shops.
Huge and incredibly expensive. The public, the media, often frames those as epic mistakes, right? Wasted resources. But internally, for Amazon's collective servo mechanism, each one was a vital GPS ping. The Fire Phone failure delivered hard data about hardware ecosystems, consumer price sensitivity, feature priorities, auctions talking about market dynamics they couldn't win. These weren't defeats. They were coordinates showing where not to build next, which paths were dead ends. Their whole culture of relentless A/B testing, constant data gathering that allowed them to pivot, adapt, and ultimately dominate in areas like retail and cloud services. Failure was just the fuel for the next, better-informed experiment. The failure data was the map for growth.
And this isn't just a recent Silicon Valley thing. This principle goes way back. Henry Ford, for instance. We remember the Model T, the Triumph.
But we often forget the painful calibration he went through first. Ford is a classic example of learning from large-scale failure. He had 2 full-blown car companies go bankrupt before Ford Motor Company succeeded.
2 bankruptcies.
Yep. First, the Detroit Automobile Company. Lasted about 18 months. Why? Cars were too pricey. His focus was maybe too much on racing, not reliable mass transport. It folded. Then, his second try, the Henry Ford Company. He left that one pretty quickly, too, clashing with investors over strategy and control.
So by any normal measure, he was a 2-time failure in the car business before he even got started. How did he use those as calibration?
He treated them like engineering postmortems. He was a master data collector, even if he didn't call it that. From the first failure, he learned crucial lessons about market positioning, pricing, the need for simpler, more reliable design. From the second, he learned about the absolute necessity of controlling the manufacturing process himself and managing investor influence carefully. These weren't emotional blows he brooded over. They were technical specifications, design constraints he logged. Those accumulated failure coordinates directly reprogrammed his approach for the third attempt Ford Motor Company, leading to the streamlined, scalable vision that produced the Model T. He didn't avoid error, he mined it for insights.
This idea of precise adjustment, relentless measurement, it applies everywhere, doesn't it? Sports seems like an obvious arena. Michael Jordan.
Oh, Jordan's famous quote is like the athlete's version of the servo-mechanism manual. It sums it up perfectly. He missed, over 9,000 shots in his career, lost almost 300 games, was trusted with the game-winning shot 26 times and missed. And he says point blank, "I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed."
The key word there feels like measurement. Each miss wasn't humiliation. It was data, precise input.
Exactly. It was measurement. Feedback to adjust his arc, his release point, the force, the timing, his read of the defense. His nervous system wasn't registering a miss as I'm terrible. It was registering, okay, feedback received, recalibrating for next shot. It's that neural adaptation loop we talked about, playing out in real time at the highest level.
And we see that same extreme dedication to data collection just in a different field with someone like James Dyson, right, at the vacuum guy.
5,127 prototypes. Think about that. 5,127 versions of his vacuum before he perfected the cyclonic separation technology. That isn't just stubbornness. That's not blind optimism. That's an engineer systematically, obsessively collecting the specific data points needed to solve a problem. He knew that the 5,126 prototype that didn't work was just as valuable in a way as the final one that did, because it definitively ruled out another coordinate on the map. It told him where not to look next.
So when you look across these examples, Bezos, Ford, Jordan, Dyson, what really separates them from how most people react to setbacks? Is there a common thread?
I think the sources point strongly to response speed, the speed of interpretation and recovery. The winners, if you want to call them that, seem to process the failure feedback almost instantly as information. They extract the data within minutes or hours and adjust. People who get stuck, who quit, tend to ruminate on it for days, weeks, months. They interpret the same feedback signal as humiliation, as proof of inadequacy. So the faster you can make that mental shift, extract the data, separate the strategy, it failed from the self, I failed, the tighter, faster, and more effective your personal feedback loop becomes. That's the engine of iteration. That's the opposite of quitting.
Okay, let's talk about maybe the ultimate modern example, the one that's literally about guided systems learning from misses. SpaceX.
Yeah, Elon Musk and SpaceX are almost a caricature of this principle in the best way. The entire operational philosophy seems to be fail fast, iterate faster. We also, those early Falcon rockets exploded spectacularly on camera. But the crucial difference between that kind of failure and, say, a conventional project failure wasn't just the explosion. It was what happened immediately after. Terabytes of telemetry data were gathered instantly. The team didn't go hide in shame. They dove into the empirical evidence. Why did the prediction fail? What did the sensors tell us? And they rerouted the design, the code, the procedures based on that specific hard evidence.
That's the servo-mechanism operating at an industrial, almost brutal scale. The system was designed to fail forward, to gather that data.
Precisely. It was a literal guided missile system learning from every single catastrophic miss. And the payoff, the reward for rigorously processing failure as data, instead of hiding from it or getting bogged down in blame, it's those Falcon 9 boosters landing themselves upright on drone ships in the middle of the ocean. It's mind-boggling. They achieved that unprecedented accuracy and reusability through a relentless systemic dedication to error correction. They fully embraced the 90% off-course reality to eventually achieve near 100% mission success.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, this deep dive really offers a completely different way to look at setbacks, big or small, neurological, psychological, professional. The big takeaway seems to be failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the engine. It's the fuel, the data that drives the whole process of growth, adaptation. When you miss the mark, your mind isn't broken. It's actually functioning perfectly. It's just rerouting.
Exactly. And knowing this isn't just, an interesting theory, it gives you a practical tool, an algorithm you can actually use day to day to rewire your own response. It comes straight from Maltz's core advice. The next time you face a real setback, maybe a pitch gets rejected, sales numbers are bad, you bomb an exam, even a simple misunderstanding, you have to consciously engage in rational self-correction to keep your internal GPS online and active.
So break that emotional spiral. Force the analytical brain to take over. How do we actually do that? Make it a habit.
You make it concrete. You force yourself to articulate the lesson. Immediately after the setback, or as soon as you can, mentally or physically, write down 2 lines, like filling out your own internal GPS recalibration form. Line 1, okay, what specifically did this failed attempt teach me about my strategy, my approach, or the environment? Be precise. And line 2, based on that data, my next adjustment will be to, again, be specific.
I see. So that deliberate act forces your brain to process the event as information, not just as pain. It shifts it from the emotional centers to the planning centers.
Exactly. It forces your brain to tag the event under progress log because you extracted useful intelligence from it instead of filing it under pain locker or humiliation archive. The ultimate lesson here is you need a high degree of self-compassion, really, forgiveness for your own necessary mistakes. Because movement, even movement that turns out to be wrong, is the only way your system generates intelligence. Standing still guarantees zero progress.
Which leads us right into our final thought for everyone listening. If all these super successful people and systems are basically just masters of data collection, masters of interpreting failure signals, then maybe the real question isn't just how do I succeed? Maybe it's also what's the smartest, fastest, lowest cost way for me to generate some essential failure data this week?
That's a powerful reframe. The universe isn't laughing when you miss. It's handing you coordinates, free data. So since movement, even messy, imperfect movement, is the prerequisite for getting those coordinates, ask yourself this: what significant move, what experiment, what action are you currently avoiding purely because you fear the inevitable necessary coordinates it will provide? And how quickly can you just make that move, get the data, and let your internal GPS do its job?
Get moving, get the data, get rerouted. That's the deep dive for today.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.